I'm so scared. Did you guys hear that? Ho-ho! What up, party peoples? Bobo here with BrassReel Brothers. Thanks for coming back for some more popcorn. Well, it's Tuesday again, and that can only mean one thing. Time for the second episode of Tuesdays with Jeremy, which you will never forget. Alright, so on this Tuesday's mystery movie presented to me by my best bud Jeremy, it's Willow Creek, directed by Bobcat Goldthwait. Yeah, that weirdo from Police Academy. He's actually a pretty talented guy in Hollywood. He's produced a lot of things. He wrote and directed this movie. He hadn't disappeared, he's just not in front of the camera anymore. But man, he was huge back in the Police Academy days. Everybody knew who he was. They just called him Bobcat. So when I heard about this movie, I was actually very interested just because of the fact that it was him writing and directing it. I actually knew about this movie before Jeremy recommended it to me. I just, for some reason, never got around to watching it. I think it's because I was over that sort of found footage movie style. And that is what this movie is. Found footage. And it's all based on the legend that everybody's heard of their whole life, Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Of course, you've had movies like Harry and the Hendersons that was hilarious and endearing and a family movie. At least it was for me when I grew up. And then you've had some other movies like The Legend of Boggy Creek that were a little more mysterious and kind of following the horror lore of it all. But honestly, they've never really done a full-on horror movie about Bigfoot that I've seen that I've liked. I'm sure they've done some like Sharknado style ones or something. But I'm talking about like a Bigfoot movie to be taken seriously, like where you're kind of afraid of him. Or it, her, shim, they, whatever it is. The premise is really simple. It's following a couple embarking on this search for Bigfoot mission. And they're shooting their own like little independent documentary. You know how people these days will do their like personal documentaries where they go to like on location scenes that were in movies or stuff like that. That's what they're doing in this situation. And they follow their relationship a little bit. You'll show them doing a little banter scenes here and there in the car where they're driving. Or they might start discussing their future a little bit. And you can tell maybe this relationship isn't as far along as it should be. But they just focus on those kind of things to get you wrapped up into the character. Like I said previously, it is a found footage movie, so it's kind of in the style of like the Blair Witch feeling a little bit, but way more watchable. Like Blair Witch, even though it was awesome for its time and was sort of the first of its kind, it was just way too shaky. This one's not shaky like that. You can actually enjoy this. But a lot of the movie is just them on this trip. So there's a lot of scenes in the car, there's scenes of them in restaurants, them visiting all these tourist locations that the locals thrive on, all about Bigfoot stuff. Bigfoot bookstores, Bigfoot restaurants. So a lot of it is kind of like you're watching footage from their vacation or something like that. But anytime those moments are in the movie, it's really just getting you involved with the characters more so you can care about them, which is really well done. There might be a couple of moments where you're getting some interviews with some people to where you might not buy their story, you might kind of tell they're acting, but most of them are believable and you're in it. You kind of feel like it's real. Some of the locals really do believe in Bigfoot. Some of them don't believe in it at all, or just not scared. They'll throw some things in here and there, like showing some misting posters on the wall, like they're in restaurants or something like that, just to tickle your brain a little bit to get you going there slowly. Ultimately, they're trying to make their way to this place called Bluff Creek, which is where the famous Patterson-Gimlin film was filmed. Like the OG real-life footage of a Bigfoot back in the day, which has now been debunked by a guy who says he was wearing the costume. I mean, he says he was, who knows? I mean, obviously, I don't know if I believe in Bigfoot or not. But those guys, Patterson and Gimlin, that filmed it are sort of responsible for the lore that Bigfoot's taken on today. The people that are obsessed with it, all that stuff, they're all obsessed with that film for sure. But the whole movie's not really approaching any sort of Bigfoot stuff for a while. I mean, you're talking about it, you're hearing about it with other people and locals, but you're never feeling scared or threatened. You're just, like I said, feeling like you're watching videos from their road trip. But once they get to Bluff Creek, where they're going, it starts to become a little sketchier. I mean, they even run into some people that start threatening them, telling them to get out of there and just turn around.
Turn that thing off.
They ultimately find their place they have to park and then hike rest of the way. That's where it starts getting fun. Because once they're in the woods, hiking and starting to get on that trail, it starts gaining momentum really fast. And not in a way that it feels forced either. It's just you've gotten to know these characters so well up until this point. Now, since you've heard all these different opinions about Bigfoot, you're like, well, I want to see myself. You sort of feel like you're a part of the movie or a part of their trip in a way. And like I said, because of all the precautions been given to them by some people that are believers. Makes you kind of nervous now that they're walking in the woods. But the best part of the movie, and literally like once you get to this point you realize what you've been waiting for, is once they set up tent for the night and it gets dark. There's this entire scene in the tent that is, I'm not kidding, probably like 10 or 15 minutes long. And man, the sounds that they start making, they basically just start scaring you by the camera being on these two people in the tent, and you're just seeing their faces, and you just start hearing these sounds, and it's really awkward sounds, and it's stuff that like at first you're like, all right, not that big of a deal, but then I'm telling you, you start to feel like you're in the tent with them. It's really well done, and like I said, now I'm like, is it Bigfoot? But just like Blair Witch Project, there's this whole like rise and fall where everything's going great between him and her, but then as soon as all the things start happening to make it a little scarier, they start kind of losing their shit. Because now they're like really afraid. They're like, what if it is Bigfoot? Another thing this movie does really well is that when they're hiking in the woods and in the daylight and everything, it doesn't make you feel like the daytime's safe. You know how like if something scary happens at nighttime and then they get to the daytime the next day, you sort of feel relieved as an audience member and stuff like that? They don't do that in this movie. They just make it worse in the daytime, and it's just as scary, if not scarier. And there is a great final scene that all is like pretty intense. It starts getting really reeled in, and it does sort of the same thing as that Blair Witch thing did, where it just shows you a bunch of vague stuff at the very end. You see things kind of at a glimpse and in a flash, but it's also like, oh! And it's images that stick with you. Not only does Bobcat Goldthwait really get you tied in and just really speed things up and the intensity just raises, but he does this really cool thing with the camera that I've never seen before. And it's a pretty tough thing to do in a horror film, to do something new and original like that. And again, with the sounds, at this point you're hearing all kinds of sounds. I mean, you're hearing monster sounds, growls, howling, knocking, all kinds of just, I mean, it's chaos. But by the end of it, you never really see a Bigfoot. So there's still that sort of legend in your head after watching this. You're like, well, does Bigfoot exist or not? Like, you get really wrapped up into it. I mean, they still make you think that it could have been a bear or something. I mean, there's a couple things that lend to, yeah, they're saying it's Bigfoot, but for the most part, it still leaves it very open-ended as like, well, was it Bigfoot? But overall, I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was great. But I can't believe it took me this long to see it, especially being the horror fan that I am. And guys, that'll do it for this episode. Thanks for tuning in for some more popcorn. Hit that like button if you enjoyed the video. Look for BrassReel Brothers on Facebook. Look for Bobby Williams on Facebook. You can find me on Twitter, BrassReel Bobby at BrassReel. And if you haven't done so already, hit that subscribe button so you can help us make it to the top. And as always, if life gives you lemons, make some hot, fresh